Welcome everyone to this video. Let's see how to respectfully tell guests in your home that they've overstayed their welcome. And I welcome you to the question answer channel. Thanks to John Francis, Tyler Lee, Adrienne Clay and Candy Welsh-Payne for sharing their answers to this question with us. The first answer will be from John Francis.
A young man who had stayed with us as a volunteer worker the previous summer. Now, a year later, the doorbell to our apartment rings. He is standing there with a friend, each with their suitcase. Hello, we came for a visit and introduces his friend. So we moved our 4-year-old daughter into our bedroom and installed them in her bedroom. Both guys were well behaved at first. They spent their days visiting friends the first one had made around our northern town. The second week, I had to be leaving the Friday morning for a 7-hour road trip and was going to be away for a few days. I gave them several days' notice, but they didn't seem to be catching on. Finally, I told them I couldn't leave them alone in the house with my wife. It would be too awkward for her. I expected them to be gone Thursday. Well, Thursday night, number one left his bags at our house and abandoned his friend to go visit someone, and stayed overnight. Next morning I was getting ready to leave, so I woke up the friend, finding him alone, belongings of both strewn across the floor. For the first time I spoke sharply, saying he had to go and get his stuff out. He said his friend had spent the night at another person's place. I phoned, woke him up, and told him he had 1 hour to get his friend and his stuff out of our apartment. I had to leave right away. About 3 hours later I stopped the car and called my wife. If they were still there I planned on telling them I would call the police in 10 minutes. However, my wife told me they had just gone out the door. Hospitality has its limits! !
What do you think? We will continue with Tyler Lee's answer.
Many of these answer is perfect for if they've overstayed an event, dinner, barbecue, but what if it's more? There's something magical about my parents' house. The entire time I grew up, I never remembered it just being the family. There was always someone who was down on their luck, and needed to crash at our place, just for a few weeks. Sometimes it genuinely was a few weeks. Sometimes it was a few months. In a handful of cases, it was years. We actually adopted one of my brothers that way. I had a cousin in his early 30s who asked to sleep at my parents' place, just for a few weeks, until he got his next job. My dad knew from experience where this was going, but my mom had too kind of a heart to say no. So my dad banned him from sleeping on the furniture. He didn't want him to get too comfy on the couch. Instead, he went to Walmart and bought an army cot. Just like this one. There's no way in hell, he thought, that he'd rather be unemployed and sleeping on an army cot than get a job. Right, wrong. My cousin slept on that army cot, in my parents' living room, for over a year. He'd spend his days watching TV and his nights playing darts with friends. My dad didn't mind him living there. It was the fact that he never called a single employer or handed out a single resume the whole time he was there. Around the 3-month mark, my dad started to wake him up every morning as he left for work, yelling, "Get a job." Around the 6-month mark, he switched to an air horn. On and on this went. Until one day, my dad left his bedroom at 7:30 in the morning, air horn in hand, and was pleasantly surprised to find my cousin awake in the kitchen. Maybe he's up to go hand out resumes. I'll give him a ride to the first spot. Until he noticed he was wearing the same clothes from the night before. At that moment, my cousin turned around with a perplexed look on his face, looked my dad square in the eye, and said, "Joe.do you know you're out of cap and crunch?" Every shred of hope my father had was dashed in that moment. "Out," he yelled, "out of my house, now. Come on Joe, don't be like that. Get the hell out of my house." "Well, let me get my stuff. I'll pack it for you. You get the hell out of my house and wait for it." My dad packed everything for him in a little duffel bag, and threw it out. 10 years later, my cousin has a very well-paying job, and has 2 children that he raises, along with a third that he supports financially. He admits that were it not for my dad finally kicking him out, he'd probably still be on that cot. He's very grateful to my dad for helping him when he needed it, but even more grateful he didn't help him when he just wanted it. So, to answer the question, when asking someone to leave, you stay polite the first time and firm the second. At the third, it's time to give them a kick on the way out.
The next answer is from Adrienne Clay.
I once took in a male friend. I am a single mom, because after a series of bad things happening to him, he was homeless, unemployed, broke and had no car. He stayed in my spare bedroom. It was supposed to be for 2 weeks. He ended up staying 4 months. During that time he stole prescription drugs from me, stole money, repeatedly borrowed my car and used up all the gas without filling it up, completely trashed his room and my kitchen, invited people over without asking me, and the people were positively scary looking, and managed to break all 3 of the TVs in my house beyond repair. I told him every day to leave, but he refused. He was charming and would always fool me into believing his bad behavior would stop. Then one night he borrowed my car saying he'd be back in 1 hour. 5 hours passed and he still wasn't home. My repeated calls and texts went unanswered. By now it was 1 a.m. on a school night. Finally, he texted he'd be home in 10 minutes. I was furious. We always kept the front and back doors locked and entered the house via the garage. So before he returned, I locked the door between the kitchen and the garage. I ignored his banging at the door. I ignored his calls. He ended up sleeping in the garage on the cold concrete floor. Within 2 days after that he was gone. Here are a few suggestions for you. Tell the guests you're going out of town. Pack your suitcases, make a fake phone call to the airline, etc. Or, walk into the kitchen naked saying you are out of clean clothes. Another idea, do what waiters do when their manager pressures them to get lingering customers to leave. Go into the guest's room carrying a bucket full of cleaning supplies and announce it's cleaning day. Then run your vacuum in there. Do this at 6 a.m.
We can continue with Candy Welsh-Payne's answer.
Last summer I had a horrible house guest. I've talked about it a lot on Quora because the experience fitted into so many questions. The visit had a specific end, but by the last evening I was completely at the end of my rope. This person was a narcissist who knew no boundaries. I longed for a quiet evening. Part of her behavior involved being extremely judgmental and religious. We had the TV on and the three of us sitting here that evening when a show came on with some pretty racy language. F***ing this and F***ing that. I pretended I didn't hear but knew it was hitting her dainty sensibilities hard. Another 5 minutes passed and she quietly got up and went to the guest room with not a word. My husband and I basked in the peace of our last night. It was wonderful to be rid of such a hostile person in my home. I think this falls under passive-aggressive.
This is the end of the video. Thank you for staying until the end. Remember to subscribe if you like the video. The likes also help a lot for referencing. You know what you have to do. Friends, it's now the end of this video. Remember to leave a comment to tell us if these answers are more for you. See you soon.